How Min's doctors made her worse by trying to help. Min was the physically strongest 65-year-old woman I ever met in my physiotherapy practice. She spent the previous 3 years training 3 times per week with an excellent personal trainer that had her swinging kettlebells, doing Turkish get-ups, and building functional strength for an otherwise soft-spoken sedentary lady. She was a retired office worker that lived alone, volunteered at the local community center, and otherwise kept to herself. During one of her regular workouts, Min strained her hip and progressively started developing pain down the side of her left leg the following week. She worked with her trainer to modify her exercises, but she was nervous about the pain she experienced, so she visited with her family doctor to ask his advice. His advice was she was lifting too many weights for her age. He told her to rest for 2 weeks and prescribed her some anti-inflammatories for the pain. Min was an anxious soul who respected her doctor's opinion, but also held her trainer in high regard, so she rested for 1 week and decided to keep working out as best she could. The medication didn't seem to help, but she was still able to do most of her workout. She stayed active and checked back with her doctor once a month about her pain. Min didn't like medications, loved working out, and was nervous about her leg. Every time she returned to her doctor, her anxiety grew a little bit more because he kept telling her to stop doing the things that she was paying her trainer to teach her, all while pushing medications and offering more medical investigations. As a result, Min's brain started worrying about what they would find on her x-rays, and the more she worried, the worse her relationship to her pain became. She kept anxiously going to her doctor but didn't really want anything he could offer her, which made her even more nervous about her leg pain. Her doctor eventually referred her to a specialist known as a physiatrist, a physician that specialized in pain and physical disability, but she had to wait for 3 months before she could see him. Min was a rule follower. She wanted to do the right thing and felt like she was supposed to obey her doctor's orders, but his suggestions just didn't seem to fit with her lifestyle. It hadn't occurred to her that the medical system maybe wasn't the best place to go for advice with her problem, but her anxious persistence pulled her deeper into it, receiving more advice about prescriptions, injections, tests, and even surgery as eventual options. Min was functionally capable, but over the 3-month wait to see the specialist, she became more and more fixated on her leg pain, to the point it was waking her at night. She walked into the physiatrist's office on edge, but clinging to the hope that he would have a solution to her problem. The doctor curtly asked Min a series of questions and performed a basic assessment in under 10 minutes, then referred her to me for physiotherapy. He casually suggested she could come back in 3 months for a lidocaine injection if need be. Walking out of this doctor's office, Min was both underwhelmed and overwhelmed at the same time. She had waited for months to see a specialist to simply receive a referral to physiotherapy, something that she could have done right away by her own volition, and now she had the idea of a spinal injection rattling around in her anxious mind. I'm not sure what she thought the doctor was going to do for her, but physiotherapy sounded like a better option than returning to the specialist. So she came to see me, all wound up with very little self-confidence and a lot of worries. I will restate my first sentence of this story, with a caveat. Min was the physically strongest 65-year-old woman I have ever met in my physiotherapy practice, but mentally one of the weakest. Her anxiety progressively paralyzed her and strongly dictated how she presented her story to her family physician and the subsequent specialist during their short visits together. Min talked about her leg pain with a sky-is-falling tone that would cause anyone to think she was significantly handicapped by the dysfunction, and in turn try their best to help her. But some people are harder to help than others. Non-pathological mental health issues are not dealt with very well, or at all by the medical system for a variety of reasons, and the results tend to be that many people's pain complaints are mismanaged. Min's doctor only had a series of 10-minute appointments to help a woman he superficially knew, and he didn't have the skill set or psychological training he needed to properly help her. The result was that Min progressively got worse after each interaction with the doctors because her expectations and needs were out of line with their scope of practice, but neither of them realized it. Min needed physiotherapy and counseling, but was offered an escalating level of medications and injections by the family doctor who she trusted. Unfortunately, it is an exceedingly common story to see people with chronic pain rooted in trauma, stress, and anxiety get pulled into a hunt for physical explanations and treated with an unreasonable number of medications, injections, and surgeries by the doctors trying to help them. I have some ideas on how to alleviate this systemic problem, and I'll introduce them in their right moment. My first encounter with Min was a 30-minute appointment where I let her tell me her story, assessed her functional mobility, and then we discussed her options. She seemed to live under the assumption she was getting an injection into her spine in 3 months' time, a thought she nervously held in the tissues of her body. She explained her left hip hurt, and that the pain would extend down the side of her leg to her knee. She spoke highly of her experience with her trainer, but ominously about her leg pain. After getting enough sense of her subjective experience, I wanted to see how much functional trouble she had, so I assessed her alignment and movement, and talked to her further about what she was doing with her trainer. I was blown away. She squatted with perfect form and could happily lunge walk across the room. She spoke excitedly about how she had mastered the Turkish get-up, which involved holding a 10-pound kettlebell above her head with one hand while she systematically got up off the floor. I could immediately tell Min's issue was not going to show up on an MRI or be resolved by a magical spinal injection. An empathetic explanation was required before any intervention. I pulled out my model of a pelvis, hip, and spine and stood with Min by the anatomical posters on my wall. I knew to start by explaining the physical structures to her and ease her into understanding how pain works in her body. I showed her how the deep muscles of her left hip were holding onto tension and affecting how the bone moved in the socket. I explained how the muscles in her thigh all attached onto her pelvis and were impacted by the tension in her hip, which may have contributed to her leg pain. I helped her understand mechanically why her hip hurt and that her doctor was not necessarily the best person to help her with this problem. I could see Min's energy calm down as she developed some hope that we could resolve her issue without injecting anything into her back. I explained her pain in a context meaningful to her at the time, and helped her refocus on how we could achieve her goals at the gym instead of telling her to stop doing something she loved. Min left with hope, but returned with stress and pain 1 week later. I had talked her off the ledge, but had far from fixed her problem. Her leg still hurt, and she had more information to think and worry about. We discussed her internal struggle with working out while her doctor told her to rest. I encouraged her she was doing the right thing by continuing to move her body. We discussed trying some IMS dry needling on the muscles in her hip and leg. I explained that her muscles should have a certain amount of resting tone. They shouldn't be limp and flaccid or braced and extremely taut. Min had likely strained the deep muscles in her left hip during one of her workouts and subconsciously developed a protective bracing pattern in the area. The bracing was mildly irritating her sciatic nerve and creating tension in her IT band down the side of her leg. The goal of IMS was to help the deep muscles of her hip let go of the tension she was unknowingly holding onto. Min was originally from Hong Kong and familiar with the idea of acupuncture, but at the same time feared the premise of sticking a needle into something that already hurt. I explained to Min that although I was using an acupuncture needle as a tool, the process of IMS dry needling was quite different than traditional acupuncture. I had gained enough of Min's confidence and trust that she agreed to go ahead with the intervention. As nervous as she was, the experience of IMS didn't faze Min at all. She laid quietly on the table as I one by one released 4 muscles in the side of her hip and 3 more points down the side of her leg. She felt the deep squeeze feeling that many people find uncomfortable, but it didn't really seem to bother her. I passively moved her hip around after the brief treatment, and she was surprised to feel how much freer the joint moved. I told her to rest that day, but to go ahead and see her trainer in a few days, then come back and see me in a week for a follow-up. Min did as I asked, and to her surprise, her pain was 70% better, but seemed to be coming back in the few days before she saw me. She was happy, but worried it seemed to be regenerating. She still held on to her concerns about her future appointment with the physiatrist. Min and I followed this pattern of once-per-week visits over a period of 8 weeks. I would talk to her about her concerns, review the exercises she was doing at the gym, and usually treat her with some IMS to help keep her hip pain under control. We progressively weaned her down to once per month and expanded the areas of her body we treated with IMS to help the global tension she anxiously held in most of her postural muscles. I worked with Min on and off for 5 years, enough time to see and feel the role emotional stress and anxiety played on her physical body and her experience of pain. I saw her through the death of a family member, mild gym injuries, her family doctor retiring, and the isolating experience of living alone during the COVID lockdowns. Min's emotional holding patterns manifested into a predictable pattern of pain that I was able to help her slowly understand and control. But I had a harder time helping her stop the practice of seeking her doctor's advice when she didn't want what he had to offer. Min had deep-rooted anxieties beyond my abilities to fully help her, so I regularly encouraged her to also work with a counselor, but to date I have not been successful. For the time being, I am her physical therapist, and when she is ready, hopefully she will also seek cognitive therapy to address another layer of her problems.